Okay, Neal, in recent weeks, Donald Trump and the GOP have attempted to rewrite the history of Trump's relationship with Ukraine, literally casting himself as both the savior and protector. I mean, I know it's a joke. In reality, Trump's politicization of both NATO and Ukraine, it's really what gave Putin a green light to invade on the basis that America was so irreparably divided that half the country would support the Russian invasion. Now, that obviously turned out not to be the case, but it does seem that Trump's political games in the region, coupled, of course, with his relationship as best friends with Putin, opened the door for this entire terrible moment. Now, I'm curious in your opinion, how you see history ultimately recording Trump's relationship with Ukraine and Putin, and how much responsibility he bears for the invasion.
Well, first of all, Michael, it's such a pleasure to see you again and to be on your podcast. And I really appreciate the question, because the idea that Donald Trump was like some supporter of Ukraine and standing up to Russia is, to use the technical legal term, poppycock. It's flat out wrong. It's like equivalent to Donald Trump saying he's the least racist person in America. Yeah, right. Just to remind everyone what that first impeachment of Donald Trump was all about. It was about Ukraine. It was about exactly this. There was a whistleblower, Colonel Vindman, who actually, listened in to the phone call where Donald Trump tried to extort the president of Ukraine, the man we all now know is a hero, Zelensky. At that time, even who's the Zelensky guy and so on. But the people in the national security establishment, like Colonel Vindman, knew exactly who he was, the leader of the Democratic Republic of Ukraine, a person who's standing up to Russia, standing up to authoritarianism. And of course, that's what Donald Trump detests. And so when Donald Trump called him and said, we're going to withhold this military aid and javelins, basically, even though Congress had appropriated it, they passed a law saying, this is stuff you must give, Mr. President. He said, well, wait a minute. Before you do that, I need you to look into Hunter Biden, help him out with his presidential campaign against Joe Biden. I can't think of something that's a more flagrant abuse of power. Indeed, it's why I wrote this book. This book is all about exactly this point. It's about when you use, our founders in their wisdom gave the president the most awesome suite of powers because they knew, to use the Federalist Papers language, presidents can act with secrecy and dispatch and do things quickly that Congress can't. We don't want foreign affairs decisions to be driven by Congress in a crisis because they can't agree on, whether to have daylight savings time or not, or anything else. So you've got to have strong presidential powers, but at the same time, that creates the opportunity for abuse. And that's exactly what Trump did, which is why, as you talk about history, Michael, in your question to me, and what history will record, history will record Donald Trump as an authoritarian, a thug, a person who didn't understand the first precepts of democracy, but it'll also condemn all of those senators and members of the House of Representatives who voted not to impeach or to acquit Donald Trump. In the cold light of day, that looks like a crazy set of decisions.
Yeah, crazy is right. Look, in your law school, obviously you probably went to an Ivy League law school.
I went to where your daughter went to law school, as I recall.
University of Pennsylvania.
Oh, I thought she went to Yale Law School. I'm sorry.
No. Oh. That's where Tiffany Trump wanted to go, but unfortunately they said, even despite the fact that your father is the president, how about, that's a big no. But in my law school, right, we don't call it poppycock. We just call it straight out and out bullshit, which is really what Trump is all about. It's just out and outright bullshit. But something that I was reading the other day, the newspaper, the online where I saw it, called The Independent. There's a journalist, I read it yesterday, by the name of Gustav Kullander. And it was really an amazing thing to me, where Trump, talk about just being disrespectful. So it's not just bullshit. He's an asshole. During the middle of Zelensky's speech to Congress, right? What does Trump decide to do? He can't allow Zelensky to have his moment. And it's not even just about Zelensky. It's all about the fact that Ukraine is under attack. Thousands of people dead, mass graves, maternity, hospitals bombed, shit on fire. I mean, this is people fleeing the country. I think 1.5 million refugees, right? What does Trump have to do? The spotlight should be on me. Quite frankly, I'm the savior, right? Well, actually, this guy Gustav writes that during the statement that Volodymyr Zelensky was making to Congress, Trump is complaining, while this is going on, of the supposed lack of reporting that he rebuilt a floundering NATO. Can you do me a favor? Because as I read through the article and as I read through Trump's statements that people forget so quickly, no one forgets faster than Donald, right? With the help of the fake news, that it was me, right, who fixed this floundering NATO, basically by forcing people, these countries to pay more into it, that he should be given some sort of a prize or at least a pat on the back. Tell me what you make of this.
I can't translate cray-cray, Michael, and that's what that is. It's just a bunch of nonsense. The facts are that Donald Trump weakened our relationship with Ukraine and strengthened our relationship with his good buddy, Vladimir Putin. And, you started our show today by talking about how Trump emboldened Putin, and that's exactly right. I mean, if you're Vladimir Putin, you've basically got a Russian asset in the president. Maybe not a winning Russian asset. It's hard to, Donald Trump's, state of mind and intelligence better than I do, but at least someone who was cozying up to a dictator and weakening our ability to basically, say to Russia, if you do X or Y against Ukraine, we're going to stand with Ukraine. And, John Bolton, President Trump's national security advisor, has been out on the airwaves in recent days saying Trump wanted to collapse NATO. The idea that this guy was a savior of NATO is a joke. So again, it's rewriting history in the most opposite way possible. And it reminds me of like what they're saying about January 6th now. It's a bunch of peaceful freedom fighters or something like that. The images are the images. We know what they are. With Trump in Ukraine, there happens to be a transcript of the phone call. Trump calls it perfect, and it perfectly wrong, perfectly impeachable is what it is. Everyone can read it for themselves and see what he said.
I just wish that it was somebody other than John Bolton, right? I mean, don't you think, Neal, that we could have used this information during the impeachment 1 and 2? Don't you think we could have used it during the hearings that were going on, even after Trump had lost the election and so on? But instead, he holds on to the information. And now all of a sudden, he wants to come out and he wants to be the good guy. He wants to try to salvage his tarnished reputation, sell a book, and basically, I don't know if you read his book. I did, right? To me, it was like pulling nose hair. And if it wasn't that I was reading it while I was in solitary confinement, and it was the only book I was able to get my hands on because everybody was trading, and it was the only book I had just gotten in and I had nothing. So a guy left it by the door for me to read. It was painful. It was painful because it's just like Trump. It's just like, Steve Bannon. It's just like the rest of these guys, that it's all self-laudatory. Oh, Donald said speak to Bolton. Bolton's the only guy who knows. Bolton, if he knows anything, should have come clean earlier on. My feeling is too little, too late.
100%, Michael. And you're talking to a guy who's litigated the question of solitary confinement torture under the Eighth Amendment. And, I certainly think there's a good case that it is, but you've just made the greatest case. I mean, if you're in solitary and the only book you're left with is John Bolton's, the founders have to have condemned that.
Now that's cruel and Neal, that's cruel and unusual punishment.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to bring that up in my lawsuit against the United States government, Trump and Bill Barr.
I'm glad you mentioned Barr, because I do think that there's this whole tendency of people in Washington to go and be witness to horrific unconstitutional, undemocratic, authoritarian events involving Donald Trump and save it for their book like 2 years later so they can cash in on it. And Bolton's part of that, and Barr, and there are
and
so
Stephanie Grisham, all of them.
All of them. And, like the idea that Bolton sat on this information during the impeachment, I can't imagine how that is consistent with your oath to the Constitution, to the laws, your responsibilities of being a U.S. citizen, the responsibilities of being a decent person who actually cares about this country, who cares about what it's about. These people have been so blinded by party loyalty or some, fear that Donald Trump's going to like get them, in the back alley or something, that they have, hid the truth and hid it for far too long.
Yeah, agreed. So, Neal, I'm curious. Though, what you think Trump's reaction would have been to a Russian invasion of Ukraine had he been president, right? Would he have stopped it, which is what he claims? Or do you think he would have just shrugged his shoulders and said, pass the salt as Putin leveled Ukraine?
Come on, Michael, he put flowers on the ground for that.
Of course I know the answer, Neal, but you're my guest,
and so I'm asking pass the
you.
Salt.
I'm asking you.
Ignorance, it would be welcoming. He doesn't care about Ukraine. As long as Putin said something nice about him, to the cameras, he'd be happy. Every dictator knows this, that the way to Donald Trump's heart is just to say some nice things about him. And all of a sudden that relationship, changes with the United States. No, I have no doubt whatsoever that Trump would have blown Ukraine just as he blew everything. I mean, the man had an anti-MeidasTouch. Literally everything he touched turned to, and you can use your expletive.
Shit.
Yeah. So
I mean, you could say it too because it's true. Okay, look, I know maybe it's not the nicest way, to describe it, but it is what it is. We're in this situation, Neal, that is potentially World War III. I mean, I never thought, I know everybody's always talked about, the possibility of World War III and mutually assured destruction because there's like 20,000 nuclear warheads between, 7 or 8 different, countries. This is different. This is really different because we're seeing so much that's reminiscent of 1935, of Nazi Germany, in terms of Joe Biden now telling Putin, if you cross 1 inch into a NATO territory, it's World War III. To which, of course, Putin responds immediately, because he's a tough guy. That's okay, it'll be nuclear. This is no joke. Like so many of, like yourself, myself, we have children. We have, grandchildren. Some have great-grandchildren, and so on. Families. I'm not looking for my son, to have to be drafted. I'm not looking for your son or daughter to have to be. I'm not looking for anybody to have to be drafted. Nor am I hoping to see our military, right? Our amazing military have to be deployed for a stupid war like this. But when I say stupid, I'm not talking about stupid in terms of saving Ukraine and democracy. Remember, my wife is from Ukraine. She's from an area that was called Chernovtsi. For some reason, they show it on the map as Chernovitz, but it was always referred to as Chernovtsi. I don't want to see when I say, stupid war. I think Putin is making this stupid. There's no reason for him to be there.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And this is where, thank God we actually have someone who's sane in the White House, because who knows exactly how Trump would handle all of this. I'm glad to see President Biden not escalate this like too much dramatically, put ourselves on massive nuclear alert and responsive to the Russians, and just to be calm and careful in his reactions. Now, it's heartbreaking too. I don't mean to say that this is necessarily the right thing, but at least it's a rational set of responses that's been going on, and someone who has the intelligence and capacity to actually react in real time, as opposed to just reacting to the latest flattery from Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, and what bothers me the most is seeing all of the images of the blown up buildings, the bodies on the ground. By the way, not just Ukrainian soldiers, most of the Russian soldiers don't even know what they're doing there. And when captured, they were like, we thought it was a training exercise. We weren't told what's going on here. I mean, I think the whole thing is just batshit crazy, and it's legitimately insane, which many people are saying that Vladimir Putin is. But what bothered me more than anything, on top of all of it, as this thing was just beginning and going on, dear old Donald jumps in, praising Putin and justifying invading Ukraine and calling it genius and savvy. What the hell is genius and savvy about invading a sovereign country that's a democracy for no legitimate purpose?
Yeah, that's beautifully said, Michael. And you can contrast that, Trump calling Putin a genius and all that with President Biden's words about Vladimir Putin, war criminal, because that's what's going on. In addition to all the horrific stuff you mentioned, the deaths of war, the fear that our children have about nuclear war, about being drafted or so on, is also the fact that Vladimir Putin is targeting civilians and in ways that are clear war crimes. And hopefully one day he'll come to justice for it.
Yeah, and then there's one more thing that Trump turned around and said, which again got me all infuriated because, again, I sat next to this asshole for so many years, for over a decade, all right? And I never thought I would hear him say something this ludicrous, this stupid, when he said, when asked about Putin and the invasion, how smart is that? And he's going to go in and be a peacekeeper. What? I don't know what was going through his mind at that time. You have any idea?
Oh, I think he meant exactly what he said, which is, he doesn't care about people or, the instability in the world order. He just kind of think, oh, that's a strong man doing a strong thing. And that's one of the biggest problems we had with Trump, which was, he'd flex his muscles in stupid ways and try and look tough. And then when it came to actually being tough, like what he does in secret with Ukraine, he blew it.
Yeah, talk about blowing it. And then, what's he going to do? You know how Donald would turn around and claim that he was averting Russia's invasion of Ukraine? He would call Vladimir Putin, little rocket man. He would take the same line that he did with Kim Jong-un. Then he'll say, oh, but, when I called him little rocket man and told him that fire and fury would rain down upon... Seriously, I don't think that anyone, including the GOP, believes anything that comes out of this guy's mouth anymore. And I think that the stupidity of the comments that he's recently made has made him persona non grata, even really with the upper echelon of the GOP.
Well, I'd like to think that's right, but I've thought that, with other stuff, the crazy stuff that he said and kind of fomenting January 6th, and maybe for a day or a week, but not long term. And, Michael, it's not like these comments about Putin just started now about how smart he is and genius. They were all through his presidency. But, there's a pretty good case that the Justice Department should seize Donald Trump as a Russian asset. It was straight through the presidency up until basically now. And, it's not a surprise that people like Putin took advantage of what those kinds of statements and how divided America would be when Donald Trump basically said nice things about Russia.
Malcolm Nance used to describe Donald as a useful idiot, that he doesn't even know that he's playing. And then, as I was just on, a recent podcast, I had Matthew Van Dyke of Sons of Liberty International, who went over to Ukraine in order to teach the Ukrainians guerrilla warfare and how to fight. So he's there right now. So I got him while he was on the ground there in Ukraine. And I can tell you something. He said the same thing. Donald's so stupid, he doesn't even realize that he's being played. And yet you get Don Jr. and Eric going on, Fox News and Newsmax and anybody that'll allow them to spew their continued nonsense, saying, my father knows better than anyone about people and he's playing Putin like a fiddle. And you sit there and you're like, oh my God, seriously, shut up, or somebody lower the microphone, because if they shut the microphone off, he would look less stupid in those comments. Yeah. And it's amazing. And I don't know what point they're trying to portray. I really don't understand it.
Right. I mean, you described him as a useful idiot, and I certainly agree with at least half of that. And I think, the thing that bothers me the most about this, having had a foot in the intelligence community world for a while in the government, is, foreign governments are incredibly savvy about our leaders, as we are about them. And we profile them with all sorts of experts, and they do it to us, from psychologists on doctors, all sorts of people, to try and understand a leader's or a person's vulnerabilities, strengths, how they're going to react to stuff, and so on. The idea that, Donald Trump can just figure all this out on his own and look into Putin's, heart and stand up to him is so dumb. It's just, that's not the way this works. Even if you are a genius, we've certainly had some presidents who are, but even still, you rely on all of that background information and experts. What did Trump do? He just blew all that off. He didn't even bother reading his daily intelligence briefings. Instead, he kind of thought he knew best. Because there were, not enough pictures in his briefings, so he just blew them off.
Yeah, well, that's because you don't know how Donald Trump operates, all right? So a question such as, should we give the $400 million to Ukraine for armaments, which was, of course, appropriated by Congress? Donald reached into the bottom of the Lincoln desk, and he pulled out his magic 8-ball. And then he started to shake the 8-ball, and it said, shake again. And so he shook again, right? Because it's either shaking that or he's going to be, right, swirling the straw in his milkshake, or, wolfing down another hamburger, and it said, no. And so that's why he decided. It was only until he ultimately shook the magic 8-ball that it said yes, did he decide to ultimately
That's a lot more methodological than I thought that Trump's decision-making would be.
It's all about the magic 8-ball, my man. It's all about the magic 8-ball. So let me move on for a second here. Because in recent weeks, the DOJ has launched a kleptocracy unit aimed at Russia's billionaire oligarchs. What will the unit be chasing? And how do these oligarchs connect to Putin? Does his power flow from them, or does their power flow from him? And how do you think seizing their assets is putting pressure on the dictator?
Well, I think it puts, a modest amount of pressure on it. It's not obviously, tantamount to arming the Ukrainians or something like that. But it is relevant that one of the ways Putin has created a power base is by working through these oligarchs who actually have a lot of Putin's money. A lot of Putin's money isn't in his own name. It's in the names of other people, and he lays claim over it with, of course, presumably the assets of, the intelligence services and so on. And, we've seen in the United Kingdom what happens if you try and cross Russia's intelligence services. So I think these oligarchs have been historically quite afraid and, wanted to give Putin his due. And so they're basically Putin's support network externally. And when you seize these, huge assets, these yachts worth $700 million and the like, you start to eliminate a little bit of his power base. Again, it's just a modest step. It's not a grand one. I have been pleased to see, Michael, that it's not just the United States doing this, but it's folks around the world. I mean, Italy and Germany and all sorts of places taking really strict actions. I mean, we've seen it with the UK, and the Chelsea soccer team, all sorts of actions to really try and get at this, which isn't an easy thing for a country to do, particularly when some of these people have really become enmeshed into the society, British, London society or whatever, but they're standing up to it.
Yeah, but as you know, and I want to make this clear to my listeners as well, let's go back to when the United States seized property by Iranians years ago. It is a lengthy and I mean a very lengthy, more than 2 years, I believe it took in order to seize certain assets, especially condos and real estate, both New York, Palm Beach, and throughout the United States. It's a lengthy process between governments, right? I mean, because they just don't roll over and say, yeah, sure, you can take it. The government is going to have to show that that individual was linked to a crime, not just having money, right? And, because he's a principal of whatever I hate to call it a state-owned company, because they own, the government in Russia owns 25% of every company, but not just because this oligarch is a, let's say, an oil magnate or a steel magnate or whatever else, but you have to show much more. You have to show the crime. And the crime cannot simply just be, hey, you're a friend of Vladimir Putin's, therefore I'm seizing your $500 million yacht. I'm seizing your house. I'm seizing your apartments. It's not that simple.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. Friendship alone can't be the basis for seizure. Otherwise, Mar-a-Lago would have been seized a long time ago.
Amen to that.
So, and it depends country by country. So as I understand it, in the United Kingdom, if you just can't prove the source of the funds for a big purchase, like a yacht or an apartment, then it can be seized. And different countries do it differently. But Michael, you're right. We all live in democracy. We're talking about largely democracies, which do have the rule of law. And one aspect of the rule of law is the government can't just take your property willy-nilly for no reason. So there is a process with Iran. You're right. There was something called the Iran Claims Tribunal, which was set up and operated for, I think, more than 20 years while it resolved these claims. Having said that, I think if you're an oligarch right now and you don't have access to your yacht or your fancy apartment or whatever, yeah, you have the prospect of a legal remedy some years later down the road. But right now, you're sitting with a lot less of an asset, a lot less set of assets than you do, a lot fewer assets than you did, a month ago. And who do you have to blame for that? You have basically Vladimir Putin to blame.
Yes, they do. I'm not sure that's going to get him to change his mind. Look, he's got plenty of money overseas, too, all over the place, which maybe this will now show us exactly where the money is. But, I, as a person who had his First Amendment constitutional right violated when I was lured down to 500 Pearl by the Southern District of New York, by the Bureau of Prisons, by Bill Barr, by Donald Trump, which that lawsuit is pending. This, to me, seems very close to a real Fourth Amendment, unreasonable search and seizure claim, against the United States government. And I just don't want this to be one of those things where it detracts from the legitimacy of what the U.S. government is doing to punish Putin. And that's my hope.
No, I hear you, but I think actually the Justice Department so far, and they've appointed a prosecutor to head this, a very respected, balanced one, I think is going to be careful about exactly that and not just seize stuff because, you happen to be in a picture with Vladimir Putin or had dinner with him, as, Michael Flynn did, and perhaps, others. So I think there's going to be a higher threshold to proof. You're right. At some point, you could imagine a prosecutor going too far. And at that point, the court system will protect, hopefully, that person.
Well, it has an obligation, right? Whether you are entitled to the protections of the Constitution. Again, assuming that you're a U.S. citizen, right? The Constitution doesn't apply.
Yeah, and the foreigners in the United States do have some constitutional rights. It just applies differently. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So let me then ask you this, because I'm curious. I'm curious what you make of John Bolton's crusade now to debunk Trump in Ukraine. We talked about this, for a brief moment, but I have a little bit more. Bolton says that he, Pompeo, and Esper were appalled at how Trump treated Ukraine, that he believes that Trump was going to pull the U.S. out of NATO in his second term, and that it was Putin was waiting for before moving forward with plans to invade Ukraine. Now, if you would, let's really dive deep into this. Discuss with me if you think Bolton actually now has the credibility to puncture this Trump narrative.
Yeah, unfortunately, Bolton doesn't. But I don't have any reason to doubt all of that's true, that Bolton saw all of this. It sounds totally of a piece of the transcript and the other things we know about Donald Trump. It certainly seems a lot more plausible than any other alternative. And I also take Bolton at his word that he probably was aghast at this, because any thinking person would be. And, Bolton's got some problems with rationality, but at the end of the day, I think he understands basic facts. And the basic fact is Ukraine was our democratic ally. Congress had said so. Congress had appropriated money for military assistance to Ukraine, and Trump was interfering with that because he had a personal agenda. He wanted some help with his presidential campaign from a foreign nation. And that's what was going on. And of course, any right-thinking person would be aghast. I would put Bolton in that. I don't know about Pompeo, but I certainly would put Bolton in that. And that was the tragedy. And that's what we were trying to explain during that first impeachment, that that's what this was about. It wasn't like some random call to a foreign leader, the kind that presidents have all the time. This was basically an extortion attempt using military aid that Congress had appropriated for that reason. And
wait, so you're trying to tell me there, Neal, that what Trump did is improper? Like you can't sort of try to extort the president of another country for the benefit of, your upcoming presidential election? I mean, is there a problem with that?
Yeah, exactly, Michael. The question answers itself.
Right? Could you imagine? But, my biggest problem with Bolton and Esper and the whole group of them is we're being asked to take them for their word. And I actually don't. I know them all. And they lie to the same extent that Donald Trump lies. They lie with impunity. They lie for their own benefit. So let me just say this to you, Neal. We're all confused here in New York about Alvin Bragg, our district attorney. We're all like apoplectic that he allowed lawyers like Mark Pomerantz. I mean, Mark Pomerantz he's about as good as you can get. And Carrie Dunn, right? To walk when you have this outstanding, potential indictment in this case. The reason I bring this up is because I know the documents that I gave to them, the documentary evidence that would have gone ahead and indicted him and put him away. What information, what documentary evidence, what anything other than their personal word and attestation have they given?
Yeah. So Michael, I'm so glad you brought this up, because to me, I am apoplectic about what looks like a decision from the New York District Attorney not to indict Donald Trump for all of his lies to the New York authorities about his properties. The two prosecutors that have been working on this case for a long time, Mark Pomerantz and Carrie Dunn, I've worked with them both, and I've worked with basically most of the nation's top lawyers, and these two are in that category. They are exquisite at what they do. And if the reports are to be believed, and I don't know, I'm just reading the newspapers, they said that a criminal case should be brought. And the new district attorney, who's been on the job for all of 1 month, has put the kibosh on that. That is, Trump skating by again because of some person in power who's afraid to do the right thing. And if this is a decision, I condemn it in strong terms. If the facts are that Pomerantz and Dunn said to indict, those folks are as good as it gets. It's the gold standard. And I don't have access to the documents, Michael, that you have and that you turned over, but I take you at your word that there's some serious improprieties here. I read your book, which was incredibly good, which detailed a lot of this. And, I sure hope that there's not a final decision being made here.
Well, you and I both. So, Neal, look, I have one last question for you, all right? It seems that the biggest benefit Trump garnered from Russia's invasion of Ukraine was the attention it took off his own legal perils. Just a few weeks ago, all eyes were on him for various entangling investigations that really threatened to take him and his family down. Now, does the war take off some of the pertinence in getting to a Trump indictment, or does the fact that he caused it make the need to put him away all that more important?
I 100% think it's the latter. I think you can't go through and think about Ukraine without thinking about how we got here. And Michael, you're absolutely right. The press cycle for the last 3 weeks has been, for all the right reasons, dominated by Ukraine. But 3 weeks and 4 weeks ago, two very significant things happened. 3 weeks ago, you had Congress filing a brief in federal court in the John Eastman case, laying out how Donald Trump himself committed federal felonies. This is an extraordinary document. To have Congress accuse the president of the United States of committing felonies, and not just minor ones like rip the mattress tag off or something like that, but the most serious ones imaginable about conspiracy and the like, is, remarkable. And it was signed, that brief, by Doug Letter, who is as sober an attorney as you can come across. He was a Justice Department lawyer for 40 years, beloved by both Republicans and Democrats alike. And he signed that document saying basically they had reason to believe Donald Trump committed these federal felonies. And before that, the week before that, you had this decision by Judge Mehta, who's one of our most respected judges in my town in Washington, D.C., basically saying on the civil side that Donald Trump couldn't dismiss the action filed by Representative Eric Swalwell and others, which accused Trump of fomenting the January 6th insurrection. And this 100-page opinion goes through all of the evidence for how Trump encouraged, aided, and abetted what happened on January 6th. So both of those things happened. To be sure, we haven't been talking about them for the last 3 weeks, but you can bet dollars to donuts we'll be talking about them in the months to come, because there is nothing more important in our American democracy than figuring out who should be president and what standards we expect of them. And here you had a guy who betrayed his oath, who betrayed his promise to the American people, all in the pursuit of a little bit of ego and a little bit of personal gain.
And a lot of power. But yesterday, CNN, Dan Berman put out an article, and there was like a couple paragraphs in it. It was all about the various investigations into Trump. And this goes to your point, Neal. And I just want to read a small part of it. Trump is being sued by lawmakers and police officers. His niece, Mary Trump, magazine writer E. Jean Carroll, whose rape accusation he denies, and his former attorney, Michael Cohen, who's already served time in jail. Now, there's also the New York State Attorney General and the Manhattan District Attorney looking at his company. There's also several congressional committees that still want his tax returns. On top of that, you have the January 6th House Select Committee investigation, as well as you have lawsuits by Democratic. I take my hat off to Eric Swalwell. I like Eric Swalwell. I really think he's great. I think he's got one heck of a future in the Democratic Party, and hopefully one day, to even be the Democratic nominee for the presidency. But you start to take a look at all of these things that Donald Trump, Georgia, as an example, to overturn the election, the conversation he had with Raffensperger. Then there's also the fake electors in Michigan. I mean, it is a plethora. Neal, have you ever seen anyone with this amount of litigation that just still is out there walking the streets, that's sitting there and stuffing his fucking face with more Mar-a-Lago burgers and Diet Cokes? I mean, standing up and getting applause by these billionaires that are there at Mar-a-Lago. I mean, there's something really wrong with the system.
Right. Michael, as an attorney, I kind of wish this guy Trump paid his bills, because he's a one-man jobs creation program for my entire profession. It's the guy operated so lawlessly that it's not surprising that it's starting to catch up with him. And to me, it's also remarkable. It's not just the lawlessness. It's also how basically everyone who has come close to him winds up having to write a book or attack him in some way because they're disgusted by his behavior. It's not just, William Barr and Ambassador Bolton, like we were talking about, it's Stephanie Grisham, it's, even Vice President Pence. It's everyone around him. And of course, you as part of that. I mean, this is a guy who cultivates loyalty by fear when you're working for him. But the moment these people are out, they're writing books and, and attacking him and calling him authoritarian or whatever, which is not a great track record. I do want to end on one note of hope, though. And the hope is to think about what happened in the day or two before January 6th, when Vice President Pence was thinking about the right thing to do. Now, this is not exactly a guy who was picked for his spine or his commitment
intelligence,
to the Constitution, right? Or his commitment to the Constitution. But what did he do? He reached out to a very conservative judge, a judge named Michael Luttig. Luttig, when I was growing up in law school, was kind of the rock solid conservative judge that every one of the conservatives in the Federalist Society wanted to clerk for. He was the runner-up to the Supreme Court seat that Sam Alito ultimately got, probably passed over because he was too conservative and the like. But Luttig told Pence, basically, and tweeted this out, that, look, Pence, this is all BS, what Trump is saying. You got no ability to pick the next president, that is totally undemocratic. And that led Pence to do the right thing. And so you have these two people, Luttig and Pence, who ultimately do the right thing. I'm really taken by what Luttig did there because, to me, he actually did more for our democracy by not being on the Supreme Court and making that decision and telling the vice president that, than anything he would have done on the Supreme Court or anything that most justices have done during their tenure on the court. So, I know we've been talking and we painted a bleak picture from Ukraine to Trump to the rule of law and the like, but there is that bright spot that I wanted to just mention.
But Neal, let's not forget for a quick second here regarding Vice President Pence. And you're right when you said he wasn't picked for his spine or for his intelligence or his rule of law for the Constitution. In fact, I believe the only reason that he went along with the decision of the judge was because they had lost the election. And he knew they lost the election and he was going to be out anyway. And so now when you start to see Mike Pence, who had the ability to say things during his 4 years there, I would have loved to see him open his mouth and say, Donald, you can't do that. It is illegal for you to do that. And then let Trump turn around and fire him.
Totally, my friend. I agree with you. My point is about Luttig. It's not about Pence. And 100% agree. So it's been such a pleasure to see you again.
Neal, the same. Neal, always good to see you, and thank you for everything. And I will definitely be speaking to you again soon. There's a lot of activity going on, especially legally, for Trump and company. So thank you.
Thank you.